The highway at night is supposed to be peaceful, just you, the road, and the sound of your tires cutting through the dark. But once the sun goes down, something else starts watching. Something that waits for the quiet, for the lonely traveler, for the ones who don't believe in stories like these. Tonight, we're diving into 5 true encounters from the road. Stories of headlights that never turned away, voices that came from nowhere, and rest stops that shouldn't exist. Turn your lights off and keep your eyes on the mirrors, because out here you never drive alone. Welcome to Fear Spiral. The car that followed me all night. I'm a 28-year-old guy from northern Arizona, and this happened about 3 years ago when I was driving home from Flagstaff to Prescott. It was late, around 2:30 a.m., and I remember that eerie silence that only exists on long stretches of desert highway. No wind, no cars, just the low hum of my tires on the asphalt. I had been visiting a friend for the weekend and decided to drive back home because I had work early the next morning. I wasn't tired, I wasn't drinking, nothing like that. It was just supposed to be a quiet, uneventful 2-hour drive through the mountains. For the first hour, everything was fine. My headlights stretched out endlessly, cutting through the blackness. The road signs flashed by, mile 74, mile 75, and my only company was a playlist of old rock songs playing softly from the stereo. Then somewhere near mile marker 89, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rear-view mirror. Nothing strange about that, except the car was far back, maybe half a mile, and yet I could tell it was matching my speed exactly. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe another late-night traveler, someone heading home like me, but as the minutes passed, I realized those headlights never got closer or farther away. Every time I'd glance at the mirror, there they were, steady, unwavering, like they were tethered to me. I decided to test it. I sped up a little, from 65 to about 80. The lights did the same. I slowed down again just to see what would happen, and then sure enough, they slowed down too. That's when something inside me twisted like a cold knot forming in my gut. It didn't feel like coincidence anymore. The highway was empty. No gas stations, no other cars, just open desert and the faint outline of hills against the night sky. I kept driving, my heart beating harder now, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe the driver just happened to be going the same speed. Maybe they were nervous too, keeping distance. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. After about 30 minutes of this, I reached a small rest area. One of those isolated pull-offs with a single flickering light and a couple of vending machines. I figured I'd pull in, let the car pass me, and then keep going. So I slowed down, turned on my signal, and eased into the lot. The headlights behind me followed, not past me, into the rest area. That's when I really started to panic. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I parked under the one working light, keeping my engine running. I looked in my mirror, expecting the car to pull into another spot or drive past, but instead it stopped right at the entrance. Engine idling, lights still on. For a minute, neither of us moved. Just 2 cars facing each other in a pool of white light and desert silence. I tried to make out the driver, but the headlights were too bright. The shape inside was blurry, like someone sitting still but watching. I can't explain it, but the stillness of that car, the fact that it didn't move an inch, was worse than if someone had gotten out. Finally, I decided to act normal, or at least try to. I got out, stretched, pretending not to notice them. The air was cold and dry, and I could smell that dusty metallic scent of desert night. I walked toward the vending machine, keeping one eye on the car, and then the engine of that car turned off. No door opened. No lights dimmed. Just silence. It's hard to describe the fear that hits you when you realize someone or something is watching you but refuses to show itself. My pulse was thundering in my ears. I turned back to my car quickly, pretending to fumble with my jacket, and climbed back inside. As soon as I started the engine, those headlights flared back to life. I slammed the gas and tore out of that rest area, heart racing, tires screeching against the asphalt. I didn't care about the speed limit anymore. I just wanted to be anywhere but there. The other car followed again, staying just far enough behind to keep me in sight. For the next 40 minutes, it was pure hell. Every turn, every straightaway, those lights were there. My phone had no signal. The clock said 3:48 a.m. when I finally saw the glowing lights of a gas station up ahead. One of those 24-hour stops with a convenience store and a single attendant inside. I pulled in fast, nearly clipping the curb, and ran inside. The guy behind the counter looked startled, but I just told him some car had been following me for over an hour. We both looked out the window. There was nothing there. No headlights. No car, just the empty highway stretching into the dark. I told him I wasn't crazy, that I saw it, that it had followed me the whole way. He nodded slowly and said, "You're not the first person to stop here saying that." He went on to tell me that for years, drivers have reported being followed between mile markers 80 and 90 by a pair of headlights that never get closer. Some say it's an old Ranger's truck that crashed off the road in the early 90s. Others say it's just desert mirages and tired eyes playing tricks. I don't know. All I know is when I looked down at my dashboard clock again, it read 4:03 a.m., and I felt like I had just escaped something that wasn't meant to be seen. I waited at that gas station until sunrise. When I finally got back on the road, the desert didn't seem quiet anymore. It felt like it was watching. I still drive that highway sometimes, but never at night. Because every time I see headlights behind me, even in daylight, I can't help but glance twice, just to make sure they're real. The rest stop behind the trees. This happened to me back in 2018 when I was 25 and working as a delivery driver in Oregon. I used to drive long routes through the state, sometimes 8 or 9 hours straight, especially when schedules were tight. Most nights I didn't mind the quiet roads, but this one night made me rethink every solo drive I've ever taken. It was late, around 2:15 a.m. when I started getting tired. I was somewhere between Salem and Bend, on a lonely stretch of Highway 22. I remember the temperature had dropped suddenly, the kind of cold that seeps through your jacket even if you've got the heater running. The radio had lost signal miles ago, so it was just me, the hum of the tires, and the occasional groan of my old van whenever I hit a bump. When I saw a green sign that read "Rest Area 1 mile," I was relieved. I'd been driving for 6 hours straight and needed to stretch my legs. The area was surrounded by trees, thick and black in the moonlight, and there wasn't a single other car in sight when I pulled in. I parked near the bathroom building, which looked old and kind of abandoned, yellow light spilling from one flickering bulb near the door. The air outside was damp and smelled faintly of pine and something else. Something sour like metal or rust. I told myself it was just wet moss or old pipes. I grabbed my thermos and got out. The crunch of gravel under my boots echoed louder than I expected, bouncing off the trees. I went to the vending machine, but it was empty, so I leaned against it and just stared at the empty road. I can't explain why, but the longer I stood there, the more I felt like I shouldn't be. There was this weird heaviness in the air, like the kind you feel before a thunderstorm, except the sky was clear. I remember hearing something then, faint, coming from the woods behind the rest area. It wasn't an animal noise. It sounded like a person talking. Just a low murmur, like someone whispering fast, their voice breaking occasionally. I froze. I listened again, trying to convince myself it was the wind, but then I heard what was unmistakably a laugh. A short, sharp one, human. I called out, "Hello? Someone there?" No answer, just silence. Then that same low murmur again, closer this time. I decided to go into the restroom, thinking maybe the sound would fade if I was inside. But the second I pushed the door open, a wave of stench hit me. Mildew, stale urine, and something else. Something almost sweet and rotten. The inside was lit by a single buzzing fluorescent bulb. The light flickered so fast it made everything seem to move. I checked the stalls, and one was shut, the rest were open. I remember thinking, please don't let anyone be in there. I knocked lightly on the closed stall door and said, "Hey, you good in there?" No answer. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. Then I noticed something odd. The stall door had a faint, wet footprint underneath it. Barefoot. The shape of the toes was clear on the dirty floor. That's when my chest started tightening. My pulse was thudding in my neck, and I could feel sweat breaking out even though it was freezing. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise. When I turned to leave, I caught movement in the mirror. At first, I thought it was me. But no, there was someone behind me. Just a shape at the far end of the bathroom, standing half in shadow. Tall, thin, motionless. I turned around fast, nothing there. The mirror was still trembling slightly, like someone had brushed against it. I bolted out of that restroom, nearly tripping on the step. My van was about 20 feet away, but when I looked up, I saw something that made me stop cold. Behind the line of trees near the rest area sign, I could see figures. 3, maybe 4 of them, standing still between the trunks. Too far to make out faces, but close enough that I could see the pale color of their clothes in the moonlight. They weren't moving, just watching. For a few seconds, I honestly thought I was hallucinating. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. They were still there. Then one of them moved forward, slowly, like they were testing if I'd run. That was all it took. I sprinted to my van, slammed the door shut, and turned the ignition. The headlights came on, sweeping across the trees. And that's when I saw them clearly. 4 people standing at the edge of the lot, their faces turned directly toward me, all of them barefoot. I peeled out of that rest area so fast the tires screamed. My hands were shaking uncontrollably on the wheel, and I didn't stop until I hit a small diner about 20 miles away. When I walked in, the guy behind the counter looked at me and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I just told him there were people at the last rest stop acting weird. He nodded slowly, like he'd heard it before. Then he said something that stuck with me. "You stopped at the one behind the pines, right? They closed that one 5 years ago. Too many incidents." I asked what kind of incidents, but he just shook his head. "People go missing there. Never found. Locals say it's not the forest you should be scared of, it's who's living in it." I never drove that route again. Even now, if I see a rest area surrounded by trees, I keep going, no matter how tired I am. Because I can still remember that feeling, that cold, wet air and those silent figures standing just beyond the light. Sometimes when I dream, I see them again. And in the dream, they're closer. The Man Under the Overpass. This happened in late 2019 when I was driving from Kansas City to Denver to visit my sister. I was 27 at the time, driving a silver Subaru that had already seen better days, and the whole trip was about 8 hours long. I left around 6 p.m. thinking I'd get there by 2 or 3 a.m., crash on her couch and sleep in. It was early December, cold but dry. By midnight, I was deep in the middle of nowhere. No lights, no towns, just endless flat land and the dark shapes of overpasses stretching across the interstate. I'd had maybe 3 cups of coffee and I wasn't tired yet, but I remember thinking I should probably pull over soon for gas. Around 12:45 a.m., I noticed an overpass coming up, one of those old concrete ones with rusted guardrails and dark patches from years of rain. Just beyond it, there was an exit for a rest stop, so I figured I'd stop there. As I approached the overpass, though, something made me slow down. There was someone standing on the shoulder, right underneath the bridge. At first, I thought it might be a stranded driver, but as my headlights washed over him, I realized there wasn't a car anywhere nearby. Just this man, tall, maybe 6 foot, wearing a long coat that looked wet or oily. He was facing away from the road, head tilted slightly upward toward the underside of the bridge. He wasn't moving. I remember thinking maybe he was homeless, trying to stay out of the wind, but something about the way he stood there, so stiff, hands at his sides, and didn't seem right. I slowed down as I passed, half expecting him to turn and wave for help. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. I kept driving toward the rest stop, trying to brush it off. It was only a mile or 2 down, just a small pull-in with vending machines and a couple of lamps glowing dim yellow. I parked, got out, stretched my legs, and tried to shake off the weird feeling. But the air was heavy that night, that deep, dead quiet that makes even your own breathing sound too loud. I remember leaning against the car, taking a sip of water when I thought I heard something. Like footsteps on gravel somewhere behind me, I turned on nothing. Just the road and the faint hum of a semi-truck miles away. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, I decided not to stay long. I got back into the car, started the engine, and glanced at the rearview mirror before pulling out. That's when I saw him, standing by the restroom building, maybe 50 feet away, the same man from under the overpass. He was facing my direction now, completely still. My headlights caught just enough of him to see his face, pale, gaunt, eyes wide open. He wasn't blinking. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Then he started walking toward me. Slow, steady steps. Not running, not calling out, just walking. Every instinct I had screamed at me to leave, so I threw the car into drive and peeled out of there. I glanced in the mirror as I accelerated. He was still walking after me, disappearing into the dark beyond the glow of the lights. I drove for almost 30 minutes before I calmed down enough to think straight. I told myself it had to be some drifter, maybe on drugs or just mentally unstable. Still, I couldn't shake the image of his blank expression, those eyes locked on me. About an hour later, I passed another overpass. Older, cracked concrete and vines hanging off the sides. I wasn't even thinking about it until my headlights swept under it. And I swear to God I saw a figure standing there again. Same long coat, same posture. This time he was facing the road. I was going 75 miles an hour, but as I passed beneath, I could see his head turn slightly, following the movement of my car. I didn't believe it at first. I even looked in the rearview mirror, but he was already gone, swallowed by the darkness. I didn't stop again until I reached Denver. When I told my sister the next morning, she laughed it off, said it was probably my imagination. Maybe it was. But a few days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I looked up that stretch of highway online. Turns out I wasn't the only one. Over the past 15 years, dozens of drivers have reported seeing a man standing under overpasses on that route, always around the same area between mile markers 302 and 309. Some say he tries to wave them down. Others say he follows their car until they pass the next bridge. Truckers call him the Overpass Man. One report from 2008 mentioned that a hitchhiker was killed there in the early 1980s, hit by a drunk driver who never stopped. They say the man's body wasn't found for days and that now, on certain cold nights, people see him standing near the spot where he died, waiting. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but every time I think about his face, pale, unmoving, and those eyes that didn't blink, I can't convince myself it was just a coincidence. I've driven that route a few times since then, always during the day. And every single time when I pass under those overpasses, I find myself gripping the wheel a little tighter, half expecting to see him again. Sometimes I catch myself checking the shoulder in my side mirror, just to make sure he's not walking after me. The last gas station on Route 12. This happened to me in the summer of 2021, when I was driving cross-country from Washington to Illinois. I was moving back home after a few rough years out west, and I'd packed my old sedan with everything I owned. Most nights I slept in cheap motels, but on the third night, I decided to drive straight through the night to make up some time. That was my first mistake. It was around 1:40 a.m., and I was somewhere deep in Wyoming, Route 12 if I remember right. The stretch of road was endless, nothing but black hills and the occasional cluster of trees breaking up the horizon. My gas light came on, and I realized I hadn't passed a single open station for over an hour. I started getting nervous. Finally, I saw an old, flickering sign up ahead. Gas, food, open 24 hours. It looked ancient, rusted, leaning slightly, the paint peeling, but I didn't care. I just needed to fill up. When I pulled in, the place looked wrong. The canopy lights above the pumps flickered like they hadn't been changed in years. The station itself was small, one of those single building types with big glass windows, except most of them were smeared with grime and dead bugs. I didn't see any other cars. The only light came from inside the building, a sickly yellow glow from the counter area. I parked by the first pump and got out. The air felt weirdly still, and the night smelled like old rubber and dust. My shoes crunched on gravel as I walked toward the door. But then I noticed something. The pump screen was dark. No digital display, no instructions. Just dead. I was about to get back in my car and leave when the door to the shop creaked open. There was a man standing inside. He was thin, wearing an old gas station uniform, the kind with a name patch on the chest. But the letters were too faded to read. His skin looked pale, like he hadn't been outside in days, and his hair was slicked back in a way that looked strangely out of place. He didn't say anything, just stood there staring at me through the glass door. I raised my hand and said, "Hey, you guys still open?" He nodded slowly, no smile, no words. I went inside. The doorbell gave a weak ding as I stepped in, and the smell hit me immediately, like old gasoline mixed with mildew and something else, something almost metallic. The man was still standing behind the counter. I noticed his uniform had a red stain on one sleeve. It might have been oil or maybe blood. I honestly didn't want to think about it. Need to fill up, I said, trying to sound casual. Pump's not working, though. He blinked once, then said in this flat, slow voice, "Try pump 3. I glanced out the window. There was no pump 3, just the two in front. I thought maybe he meant the one farthest from the building, but I didn't argue. I thanked him and turned to go. Before I could push the door open, I heard him say, "Don't go around back." I stopped mid-step. "What?" He didn't answer, just looked at me expressionless. The way he said it, calm, emotionless, felt less like a warning and more like a rule. I gave a nervous laugh, said, "Okay," and walked back outside. I checked both pumps again. Still dead. I was getting frustrated now, ready to just leave, when I heard something. A faint metallic clank from behind the building. Then another. It sounded like someone moving a gas can or dragging a chain. Remembering what the man said, I tried to ignore it. But curiosity won, as it always does. I walked toward the corner of the building, flashlight on my phone cutting through the dark. There was an old pickup truck parked halfway behind the station. Its doors were open, and there were fresh, wet footprints leading from it to the back wall. My stomach dropped. Then I heard it again. Clank. Scrape. I turned the corner and froze. There was another man crouched near the back door facing away from me. His clothes were filthy, covered in something dark and sticky. He was doing something to the ground, digging or maybe dragging something heavy into a pit. I whispered, "Hey." He didn't move. I took one cautious step forward. That's when I realized the dark patch near his hands wasn't dirt. It was blood, and whatever he was dragging looked disturbingly like a human arm. He stopped suddenly, head twitching like he'd heard me. Then he turned, I'm slow, jerky, and looked right at me. His eyes were wide and glassy, mouth open just slightly. I swear his pupils were huge, like black holes swallowing his face. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he smiled. That's when I ran. I sprinted around the corner, practically dove into my car, and started the engine so hard I almost broke the key. I floored it out of that lot, gravel flying everywhere. My headlights swept across the building one last time. And in that split second, I saw the man from the counter standing at the window, watching me leave. Only now, his face wasn't expressionless. He was smiling too. I didn't stop driving until I saw another open gas station 40 minutes later. This one was clean, modern, and actually had people inside. I told the clerk what happened just to get it off my chest, and he frowned immediately. He said, "Man, there hasn't been a 24-hour station on Route 12 for years. It burned down back in 2007. I thought he was joking, but when I looked it up later, and he was right. There really had been a gas station out there, but it had caught fire after a double homicide. 2 employees found dead behind the building. The place was condemned and demolished, only I know what I saw. I was there. I stood on that gravel, smelled the gasoline, saw the flickering lights. Sometimes I wonder, if I had gone around back just a few seconds earlier, maybe I'd have seen what or who they were dragging. But the worst part? The next morning when I unpacked my car in Illinois, there was a handprint on my trunk, smudged in what looked like oil, or something darker, and it wasn't mine. The voice from the CB radio. This happened to me back in 2016 when I was working long-haul trucking across the Midwest. I'd been driving rigs for almost 10 years by then, and I liked the solitude, the miles of highway, the hum of the engine, the way the world feels smaller when it's just you and the road at night. But every trucker will tell you the same thing. It's not the loneliness that gets you. It's the things you hear when you know you should be alone. It was early February, snow still clinging to the ground, and I was hauling a load of construction supplies from Oklahoma to Nebraska. The schedule was tight, so I decided to push through the night. Around 2:25 a.m., I was somewhere near the Nebraska-Kansas border, a long, empty stretch of I-81 that's usually deserted at that hour. The highway lights had thinned out miles ago, and the sky was so black it felt like driving through a tunnel. The only sound was my engine and the faint crackle of the CB radio. Background static that most drivers leave on just to break the silence. About 20 minutes later, I started getting that uneasy feeling. It's hard to explain. The sense that you're being watched even though there's nothing out there but darkness. My mirrors showed empty road in both directions. No headlights. No taillights. Just me. Then the CB crackled louder. And I heard a voice, Breaker 19. You out there, brother? I grabbed the mic thinking it was another trucker. Yeah, go ahead. The voice that came through didn't sound right. It was male, low, but there was something strange about the tone. Slow, distorted, like someone talking through a wet cloth. You shouldn't be out here, it said. I paused. What's that supposed to mean? No answer. Just static. I waited, staring at the dark highway, half expecting headlights to appear behind me. Nothing. I let it go and kept driving, figuring it was some weirdo messing around on an open channel. But about 15 minutes later, it came back. Hey, trucker, mile marker 214. I looked down. My stomach dropped. I was passing mile marker 214 right then. I picked up the mic again, trying to keep my voice steady. Okay, funny joke, man. Who is this? Static hissed through the speaker, then faint laughter. Soft, broken, like someone trying to imitate a laugh but not quite knowing how. Then, clear as day, you should have stopped back there. I didn't know what to say. I turned the CB off completely, but even with it silent, I couldn't shake the sound of that voice. I checked the mirrors again. The highway was still empty. Around 3 a.m., I saw a faint red glow ahead. Brake lights from a vehicle pulled onto the shoulder. It looked like another truck, but the trailer was tilted slightly like it had blown a tire. Normally I would have stopped to help, but after that voice I decided to pass. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. The cab door was wide open. Snow had piled around the tires. No one inside. I slowed down just enough to glance at the cab window, and that's when I saw it. There was a handprint on the inside of the windshield. Not like a normal one. It was long, thin, the fingers almost double length. It looked smeared, as if someone had pressed their hand there from the inside while being pulled away. I accelerated again, my heart thudding in my chest. The rest of the drive was quiet, except for one thing. I kept seeing movement in my side mirror, just faint shadows along the highway edge, like something running just outside the light of my tail lamps. Every time I turned to look, it was gone. At 3:42 a.m., my CB turned itself back on. I hadn't touched it. It just hissed for a few seconds, then the same voice whispered, "Don't look behind you." That was it. I shut the radio off again, this time yanking the cord from the dash. The rest of the trip felt like a blur, just miles of road, white lines flashing past. My hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went numb. When I finally reached a truck stop in York, Nebraska, it was almost dawn. I pulled in, shaking, parked near the diner, and just sat there for a while trying to steady my breathing. Another trucker came over, asked if I was okay, and I told him what happened. About the voice, the mile marker, the handprint. He got quiet. Then he said, "You were near mile 214? Yeah, I know that stretch. You ever hear about the I-81 accident? Apparently, about 10 years before, a driver had rolled his rig under that same overpass and caught fire. The truck burned completely, but when rescue crews got there, they never found the driver's body. Just the melted radio. Some say his voice still comes through on certain frequencies around that mile marker, mostly on nights when the snow is falling." I didn't believe it at first, but when I went to get breakfast later that morning, I walked past another driver's truck, and through his half-open window, I heard faint static playing through his CB. Just before it cut out, I heard that same dragging voice again, "Breaker 19. You out there, brother?" Even now, when I'm driving long routes alone at night, I keep the CB turned off. I can't handle that crackle anymore. The hiss, the whisper, the sound of someone who shouldn't be there. Because every trucker knows the same truth. The road remembers everyone who dies on it. And sometimes, it talks back.